McLaren Honda. Another great year for McLaren, absolutely dominating the season to take their fourth Constructors' title of the decade. The MP4-5 was clearly the fastest car out there, with 15 poles out of 16, 13 of them for Senna, which equalled his record from 1988 and took him past Jim Clark's 20-year-old career record of 33. The other teams had caught up a little, and the McLarens had a bit more bad luck with reliability, so they only won 10 races, and you have to think that the developing Prost-Senna feud caused more problems, even outside the obvious one in Suzuka. That won't be at least an internal problem next year, though no doubt the rivalry will continue. Senna will presumably simmer down over the winter and return to the team ready to fight for the 1990 title, and Ron Dennis will be hoping that the incoming Gerhard Berger, famous for being a bit of a joker, will lighten the mood, while also pushing Senna. Designer Steve Nichols is accompanying Prost to Ferrari, so Ron will also need to replace him. Tyrrell Ford. Tyrrell's best season in years. The new 018 chassis worked well and was pretty nippy despite the underpowered Ford DFR in the back. Losing Alboreto over sponsorship issues might have been a major problem if Ken Tyrrell, with his unerring knack of finding talent, hadn't signed up Jean Alesi, who proved to be the find of the season, with fourth on his debut. The end result for the team was fifth overall, best of the rest behind the big four of McLaren, Williams, Ferrari and Benetton, and the best team without a works engine. In the cockpit, Jonathan Palmer was overshadowed by both Alesi and Alboreto, and ultimately decided after the season to hang up his helmet, but he did at least manage to record the only fastest lap of his career in Canada. Williams-Renault. A much improved season over 1988 for the team, and a very satisfying return to F1 for Renault. The new FW13 chassis was introduced very late, as the team were generally happy with the performance of the FW12C and wanted to get the new car just right before starting to use it. As things went, there wasn't actually a huge differential of performance between the two chassis, and the team were able to pip Ferrari to the runners-up spot in the championship. Riccardo Patrese had possibly the best season of his long career, with a string of podiums on his way to third behind the two McLaren drivers, despite still searching for that elusive third career win. New boy Thierry Boutsen, by contrast, won twice, but was otherwise rather outperformed by the veteran. Hopefully for 1990 he can rise to the challenge. Brabham Judd. The revived team looked good early on in the season as they made a comeback, breezing through pre-qualification most of the time and shining on the streets of Monaco, where Monaco came third and Brundle was sixth, and would probably have done better if he hadn't had to stop and replace a new battery. The team never quite lived up to the promise of that result, though, with a combination of a lack of outright power from the Judd V8, Pirelli's indifferent race tyres, and unsettling behind-the-scenes drama. With Swiss owner Joachim Lüthi now in prison for fraud, Japanese concern Middlebridge stepped in to fund the team to the end of the season and seemed keen to continue the arrangement into 1990. Assuming that all pans out, both Brundle and Modena are signed up for next year. Arrows Ford. A solid, if not brilliant, season for Arrows, with 5 points finishes for Warwick, though never higher than fifth, while Cheever struggled all season with a car that just didn't fit his lanky frame. He did manage a popular podium on home tarmac in Phoenix, 2 weeks before Warwick actually led in the wet in Canada, albeit briefly. Ultimately, though, the A11 chassis suffered from the lack of power from the Ford DFV. There's been a feeling that the team have been just treading water for the last few years with Warwick and Cheever in the cockpit, the USF&J sponsorship, but that's all finished now with new ownership and title sponsors and new drivers for 1990. Lotus Judd. If Williams and Ferrari improved in 1989 over 88, Lotus seemed to be going backwards. Where Piquet at least stood on the podium last year, the best he could do in 89 was 3 fourth places. The car was mostly reliable, it was just slow. The Judd engine, not even a works engine but the 1988 spec customer one, didn't develop enough power, and the Goodyear tyres were designed for the heavier McLaren and Ferrari teams. A management reshuffle mid-season looked promising until the team recorded its first double DNQ since 1958, which rather wiped the smiles off everyone's faces again. It's difficult to escape the thought that the problem lay at least partially in the cockpit. Nakajima's not really a top-draw driver and he struggled all season, while Piquet just looked disinterested, as he often does when the car isn't on top form. Both are on their way for 1990, and Rupert Mannering and the team will be hoping that new drivers and a more powerful Lamborghini engine for next year will stop the rot. March Judd. March's results in 1989 are pretty gruesome reading, especially in comparison with the heroics of 1988. Things started off so well, with Gugelmin's third place in the season opener in Brazil, but that turned out to be the team's only points finish all season, with the new CG891 chassis introduced in Monaco proving nothing short of a disaster, though Gugelmin posted 3 7th places in it, so he came close to scoring again. The problem wasn't with Adrian Newey's aerodynamics, and the car was quick when it was running, but the gearbox casing was fragile and failed often, while the engine electrics were another Achilles heel. It's really been Capelli's team since they arrived in 1987, and both he and Gugelmin are signed up for next year. Osella Ford. Enzo Ozella's little team had had one of their better seasons, though you wouldn't know it from the results, just one finish all year. Larini put in some good qualifying performances, particularly at the last 3 races when issues in the Onyx team allowed him to get through the overcrowded pre-qualifying sessions. The young Italian is definitely one to watch for the future, but not with Osella, as he's moving on to Ligier for next year, while Piercarlo Ghinzani was largely invisible in the second car. A team favourite, but maybe he tried one comeback too many. Enzo Osella has sold a stake in his team to Gabriele Rumi's Fond Metal alloy wheels concern, which did lead to a bit more funding, and hopefully that will continue into 1990. Benetton Ford. Good work by Benetton this year to give Nannini his debut win, and even if it was inherited following the Senna-Prost debacle in Suzuka, it was no less than he deserved over the season as a whole, and yet the team still feel like they're underperforming. Some feel that the Ford V8 in the back, even the works engine, can't compete on power with the Renault and Honda V10s and Ferrari V12s. Others whisper that, good though Nannini is, he just doesn't quite have the star quality needed. Whether Piquet will provide that quality or just be in cruise and collect mode remains to be seen, but the occupants of the number 20 car in 1989 were promising rather than great. Herbert probably did his career no favours by trying to drive before he could walk, while Pirro's indifferent qualifying pace often left him too much to do on Sunday and got him involved in too many accidents. Scuderia Italia Dallara Ford. A bit like Brabham, sailing through pre-qualifying with ease and putting up some great results, including 3rd on the grid and 4th in the race at Monaco for Caffey, but then slipped back over the season as the reliability started to go. Though Alex Caffey in particular put in some great qualifying laps, 3rd again in Hungary, and the top 10 in Mexico, Canada, Portugal and Australia. De Cesaris got himself a podium and narrowly missed the points on a couple of other occasions, and although usually out-qualified by Caffey, he usually performed decently on the day, except for his brain fade in Phoenix where he put Alex in the wall. No word yet on plans for 1990, but they are expected to stick with the customer Ford engines at least, while Caffey has been snapped up by Arrows. Minardi Ford. Easily Minardi's best ever season, though the first half didn't look promising, with neither Martini nor Sala recording a finish in the first 7 races. Then, needing 3 points at Silverstone to save themselves from dropping into PQ for the second half of the season, a miracle saw them get exactly that, and they never looked back. Martini qualified in the top 10 4 times in the back half of the season, 3 of them in the top 6, and he even briefly led in Portugal and held off Boutsen for second for several laps in the wet at Adelaide. No mean feat, as the Pirelli wet tyres were pretty bad. Sala, on the other hand, just never seemed able to get the hang of things, failing to qualify on 4 occasions, including in Australia where Martini lined up 3rd. Nothing's confirmed yet, but talk around the espresso machine is that he'll be on his way for 1990, possibly to make way for Paolo Barilla. Ligier Ford. It seems a very long time ago that Ligier was winning races between 79 and 81, and almost as long ago that René Arnoux was a championship challenger with Ferrari. His 5-year stint with the French national team ended with something of a whimper, and there are many in the paddock who won't be too sad to see the back of a man who's gained a real reputation over the last couple of seasons for being difficult to lap. The Ligier JS33 took a lot of design cues from the 1988 March, including buying in the same gearbox, but achieved nowhere near the same level of performance, even allowing for everyone else to have moved on a bit. A pair of points finishes in Canada and France was enough to save the team from the ignominy of pre-qualification, but that's about all that can be said in the positives column. Olivier Guillard looked a decent driver and usually outqualified Arnoux, but his inexperience showed, and there were also signs that he'd picked up some of Arnoux' bad habits about his mirrors. With Ligier having confirmed Larini and Alliot for next season, Olivier's future is as yet undecided. Ferrari. John Barnard's first, and now it seems only, solo Ferrari design was so close to being a world beater. The aerodynamics worked well and the V12 engine had bags of power, and in the hands of Mansell and Berger there were two great drivers. And if only that semi-automatic gearbox and its related systems had been reliable, one of them could have been champion in 1989. Probably not, admittedly, but Berger in particular will be left brewing his appalling luck. With only 3 finishes all year, he won once and came second twice to take 7th in the table, while Mansell was third and best of the rest until that calamitous pit stop in Portugal, and the aftermath saw him disqualified there and banned for the next race. But if his first season at Ferrari was a bit of a disappointment overall, he's certainly won over the Tifosi. Larousse Lola Lamborghini. Another story of unfulfilled promise at the other end of the grid. The Lola LC89 seemed a decently fast chassis, and the V12 Lamborghini engine in the back developed lots of power, but with it came all the usual teething troubles of a new engine, which weren't really sorted out until nearly the end of the season, and there were problems in the cockpit too. Yannick Dalmas seemed not quite to have recovered from his bout of Legionnaire's disease last year, and while it seems harsh, the team were probably right to let him go after 5 DNQs in 6 attempts. Michele Alboreto did better, but he also seemed out of sorts, possibly just demoralised at what looked like the rapid unravelling of his career, going from Ferrari to pre-qualifying in the space of 12 months. In the other car, Philippe Alliot often qualified well, very well in Spain, but his erratic driving saw him spin or crash almost as often as his car broke down. Eric Bernard acquitted himself well in his 2 races, and he's been hired on full-time for 1990, alongside fellow Lola alumnus Aguri Suzuki. Coloni Ford. Another one of those hard-trying little Italian teams. Enzo Coloni's little outfit operate on even more of a shoestring than Osella or Minardi, driving half the season on the old 1988 car before the new C3 was ready. That saw a slight improvement, with Moreno able to get it into the race 3 times, including on its debut in Canada, in addition to both drivers qualifying the old car in Monaco. It's certainly noticeable that the team recorded 4 qualifications before they slipped into PQ and just 1 afterwards, a statement at least as much about how much of a lottery those Friday morning sessions could be, especially for a team with tight resources and few staff to quickly turn a car around and send it out for another go. In the second car, Pierre-Henri Raffanel didn't exactly distinguish himself, but he was still better than the frankly hopeless Enrico Battaglia, who was slowest in every single time session he drove, sometimes by quite a margin. You have to hope that Coloni at least got some decent sponsorship money out of him, and for Enrico's sake that he's given another shot with a bit of actual support in the future. EuroBrun Judd. There isn't really a lot to say about EuroBrun, given they didn't qualify for a single race and only made it through pre-qualifying once. It was obvious fairly early on that the Euro racing half of the equation were losing interest, and even a new chassis by George Wrighton and a bit of sponsorship from Jägermeister couldn't do much to arrest the decline. If anything symbolises the team's state at the end of the season, it was the rehiring of Oscar Larrauri, who'd been fired for underperformance halfway through 1988, to replace the departed Gregor Wojtek. Funnily enough, nearly a year off F1 hadn't improved his chances of qualifying, but probably at that point it would have taken a miracle anyway. With Euro racing now reportedly stepping away from the whole operation, it's unlikely we'll see them back next year. Zakspeed Yamaha. Well, at least Schneider qualified twice, and they weren't always the absolute slowest. Another case of engine troubles, the Yamaha OX88 proving unreliable, heavy and slow. At Jerez, the engine was reported to be producing 560 brake horsepower, that's 418 kilowatts, against the 620, 462 kilowatts, of the customer Ford DFRs and Judd CVs in most of its direct competitors. Bernd Schneider was the only driver to qualify, though he wasn't always faster than Suzuki, while poor Aguri was really just there at Yamaha's behest to test the engine and never really stood much of a chance. Both Eric Zakowski and Yamaha have said they'll be back next year, but the same can't be said of title sponsor West, who have washed their hands after 5 years with just 2 points to show for it. Much will therefore depend on whether Eric can scrape up the funds for next year. Onyx Ford. The story of the Onyx team had already been a bit of a roller coaster before a wheel turned in Brazil, and they certainly had all the ingredients for a decent car, with design by ex-McLaren man Alan Jenkins and an experienced, talented driver in Stefan Johansson. The weak link in the chain was, of course, its erratic millionaire co-owner, Jean-Pierre Van Rossum, who made all the right noises early on, but quickly showed himself much more interested in playing the part of the Playboy Grand Prix team owner than spending any actual money on the team itself. Most notably dropping $20 million for a new Gulfstream 4 private jet a week after the fiasco in Canada where Johansson had exited the pits trailing a tyre gun. Van Rossum shot his mouth off in the Belgian press about both Bernie Ecclestone and Jean-Marie Balestre. Then, when his protégé Bertrand Gachot dared to voice discontent with the lack of testing, he was immediately fired, and it was only the hiring of JJ Leto, another good find, that saved the whole thing from being an absolute debacle. Nobody begrudges Johansson his podium in Portugal, a much-deserved fillip for both team and driver, but questions have to be asked about Van Rossum's ownership and the team's future. Rial Ford. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Rial's first season in F1 had gone reasonably well, but volatile team owner Gunter Schmidt managed to drive off some of his best staff, including designer Gustav Brunner, and despite a fourth place in Phoenix to match de Cesaris's result from last year, it was obvious as the season wore on that the team were getting further and further behind as Schmidt returned to form, not replacing parts until they broke, like Foytek's rear wing in Spain, and with little to no testing or development. Christian Danner is a decent driver, but even he couldn't do much with the car later on, while young Volker Weidler was left completely high and dry. AGS Ford. The plucky little French team survived two major upheavals early in the season, with the sale of the team to businessman Cyril de Rouvre and then Philippe Streff's horrific accident in Rio. It's an ill wind that blows nobody good, as they say, and Gabriele Tarquini found a drive after the failure of first racing, and the season started decently, with Tarquini qualifying for 6 of his 7 entries and scoring a point in Mexico. Until the team slipped into pre-qualifying, at which point they didn't even make it through to qualifying, never mind race day. Joe Winkelhock, like most of the new young drivers at lower-end teams, struggled to get anywhere with only a warm-up and a couple of pre-qualifying laps every 2 weeks, and the more experienced, if still not fully fit, Yannick Dalmas couldn't do much better. Everyone wishes the little team well, but it will be no great surprise if they didn't make the start line in 1990.